The sun was low over the dusty plains, painting the horizon in shades of fire and gold. A lone rider kicked up a small storm of dirt as she urged her horse forward, heart hammering in her chest. She could see the small adobe house on the far ridge, the place where her sister was held, guarded by men who did not care for mercy. She had no time to think, no choice but to act. Every second counted. The wind carried a faint warning, but she ignored it. She was desperate, and desperation made people do things they never imagined. Her name was Lila, a young woman of barely 19 summers, with a determination that burned brighter than any fear. Her sister, younger by 3 years, had been taken by a gang of drifters, men who thrived on the lawlessness that spread like wildfire across the territory. The lawmen were days away, and the men holding her sister cared for no rules, no justice, no promises. Lila had tried every option she could think of, pleading with neighbors, seeking help from travelers passing through, even sending secret notes through the night. Every plan had ended in failure. And now, standing in the heat of late afternoon, she made the only choice she could. She would offer herself in exchange, just for one night, to save her sister. The thought weighed heavy on her chest as she approached the house. Her pulse raced with shame and fear, but her eyes were sharp, scanning for danger. She had grown up in these parts, raised on stories of courage and honor passed down from her mother. Her mother had taught her that family was sacred, that the bond between sisters was a force stronger than fear, stronger than any threat. Lila felt that truth now in the deepest part of her soul, every fiber screaming for action. She dismounted, tethering her horse to a post and taking slow steps toward the door, her fingers brushing the grip of a hidden dagger beneath her skirts. Inside, a fire flickered low in the hearth, shadows dancing along the walls. A man sat at a rough wooden table, polishing a knife, his expression wary but calm. Another leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at the sound of Lila's approach. They did not expect her, not in this way. They thought she would run, plead, maybe faint. But she walked tall, carrying the kind of resolve that made even the toughest men pause. "I want to make a trade," she said, her voice steady, though her stomach twisted. "One night for my sister. Only one night. You let her go, and I'll stay." No tricks, no games. The men exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Lila held her ground, unwilling to flinch, unwilling to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She could feel her sister behind the closed door, trembling but alive. That was all that mattered. "Why should we trust you?" one of the men asked, his tone rough, carrying the weight of authority he didn't fully earn. "You think we'd let her go just because you said so?" "I don't ask for trust," Lila said quietly, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the room. "I only ask for a chance. If I go willingly, you get what you want, and she walks free." "That's the deal." The man studied her, his eyes sharp, noting the set of her jaw, the clarity in her gaze. He seemed to measure her courage, weighing it against his own greed. Then, slowly, he nodded. "One night, but you understand? No one does this without consequences." Lila's throat tightened. She nodded once, her mind racing with what she could and could not control. She glanced at the door where her sister was kept. The fear there in her sister's eyes mirrored her own, but it was mixed with hope. Hope that she was the one who could save her. That hope gave Lila strength she didn't know she had. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Lila's heart pounded not from fear alone, but from the enormity of what she had just promised. She had no illusions about the night ahead, but the thought of her sister being free made the sacrifice feel possible. Every step she took forward was measured, deliberate, a dance along the edge of danger. Then the door creaked open, and a figure stepped out. He was not like the others tall, with broad shoulders and eyes that seemed to read more than just appearances. His face was rugged, marked by a life spent under the sun and wind. The Apache had seen much in his time, but there was something in Lila that caught him off guard. A fire he had not expected. "You're serious, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low, carrying a note of respect. Lila nodded, her chin high. "I have no other choice," she said. "It's her life or mine. One night? That's all I'm asking." He studied her, and then something shifted in his expression, a flicker of something unspoken. "And you? You are sure? There's no hidden truth here." Lila's eyes widened, realizing that he could see through the story she had prepared, through the bravery she displayed like armor. She swallowed hard. I am a virgin," she said, voice trembling slightly but clear. The words hung in the air, heavier than she expected, and for a moment silence claimed the space between them. The Apache did not speak. He only looked at her, as if weighing the meaning behind her words, the depth of her sacrifice. There was a stillness, a quiet respect that surprised Lila. He had seen much cruelty, much pain, and yet here she was, offering everything for someone she loved. The other men shifted uneasily, sensing a change in the room, sensing the tension between the two of them. Lila's heart raced. She had not expected this reaction, not the weight of his gaze, not the quiet that seemed to make the world itself hold its breath. She could see the conflict in him, the conflict between desire, honor, and the recognition of her courage. "You understand the rules," he finally said, voice steady, carrying an authority that made the others step back. "One night, nothing more." "And she walks free." "Yes," Lila whispered, relief and fear tangled together. She wanted to collapse, to cry, to run, but she held herself still. She had come too far to falter now. She glanced toward the door behind him, imagining her sister's face, the freedom that was so close she could almost touch it. He nodded once, a gesture that was both acknowledgement and warning. "Then let's not waste time." Lila followed him, heart hammering, every step measured. Her mind raced, knowing that the night ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. She clutched the dagger hidden beneath her skirts, a silent promise to herself that she would endure, survive, and protect her sister no matter what. As they walked toward the small cabin at the edge of the clearing, the wind shifted again, carrying with it the scent of cedar and smoke from a distant campfire. Lila's pulse raced, not from exertion alone, but from the weight of the choices she had made. The night was coming, and with it, the unknown. Every shadow seemed longer, every sound sharper. The world around her was alive with danger and possibility, a knife edge that could cut either way. Inside, her sister pressed against the wall, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. Lila caught her gaze, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'll be back," she promised, though even she knew she could not predict the night ahead. The Apache led her into the cabin, his presence both intimidating and strangely protective. Lila felt a strange respect for him, an understanding that he was a man of rules and honor in a world that had few. He could have been cruel, like the others, but there was something in the way he measured the moment, in the way he acknowledged her sacrifice, that set him apart. The night was stretching before them, a shadowed expanse full of possibilities, threats, and the weight of choices that could not be undone. Lila felt the tension tighten around her like a rope, each second a reminder of the deal she had made, the promise she had given. She had no illusions about what was to come, but she also had no fear that she could not face. Outside, the wind carried the cries of distant coyotes, the whisper of the desert night. Layla's heart beat in time with the rhythm of survival, her mind focused on one goal, her sister's safety. Everything else, the fear, the shame, the uncertainty, was secondary. She would endure, she would survive, and somehow she would protect the one person who mattered more than herself. The Apache watched her closely, a silent sentinel in the room. His expression was unreadable, yet in his eyes there was recognition, perhaps even a trace of admiration. He knew the stakes, knew the sacrifices, and he knew that the night would not be easy for either of them. But he also knew that courage, in its purest form, demanded respect. Lila took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was coming. The door closed behind them, the world outside falling away. In that small, shadowed cabin, the rules were clear, and the tension between duty, honor, and survival hung thick. The night had begun, and with it, the true test of courage, love, and sacrifice. She had made her choice. Now, all she could do was survive the night and hope that the dawn would bring her sister back to her arms. The Apache remained silent, watching, waiting, and in that quiet, unspoken understanding passed between them, something shifted, something that neither could yet name. And then, a sudden noise from outside shattered the fragile calm, a reminder that danger never rested, that the world beyond the cabin held threats no promise could shield them from. Lila's hand tightened around her dagger. Her heart raced. The night was far from over, and the first shadow of what was to come had just crossed the threshold. The wind moaned through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the weight of choices, sacrifices, and secrets yet to be revealed. Lila knew the path ahead would test everything she thought she knew about courage, about love, about survival. And as the night closed in around them, she realized that the story was only beginning, that the true danger was still waiting just beyond the light. The tension in the room was palpable, a knife edge of fear and anticipation. The Apache's gaze never left her, steady and unyielding, and for the first time, Lila understood the depth of the unspoken rules that governed this world. One night had the power to change everything, and every choice she made would echo far beyond the confines of this cabin. The air was still, the wind outside whispering secrets of the desert. Lila's grip on her dagger loosened only slightly, the weight of the promise she had made pressing down on her like the night itself. And then, a sudden sound, a distant shout, a horse galloping, reminded her that the world beyond the walls was watching, waiting, and that the night held far more than she could see. In that moment, everything hung in balance, her sister's freedom, her own fate, and the unexpected respect of a man who understood what it meant to make a sacrifice that no one else could. The story was just beginning, and the night had only just started to reveal its truths. The cabin's door rattled softly, as though testing the courage within. Lila's breath caught. The Apache's eyes narrowed slightly, aware that the first test of their fragile agreement had arrived. Outside, shadows moved in the dark, and the desert held its breath. The night was alive, and so was the danger. Lila steadied herself, feeling the weight of her choice, the fire of her determination, and the fragile thread of hope that linked her to her sister. The Apache remained silent, his presence a steadying force, and for a brief moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. The night would demand everything, and neither would emerge unchanged. The wind whispered again, carrying the scent of smoke, dust, and something darker, something that promised that the dawn would not come easily. Lila knew then that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. And as the first shadows pressed against the cabin walls, she felt the story pull her forward, into a night full of uncertainty, danger, and choices that could not be undone. The first step into the unknown had been taken, and the night stretched endlessly before them. The cabin was small, the stakes enormous, and the silence heavy with tension. Lila's sister was waiting, her life dangling on the edge of a promise made in desperation. And outside, the desert held secrets that neither of them could ignore. The Apache spoke finally, his voice low, steady, carrying a weight that matched the gravity of the moment. "One night," he said, "and we survive." Lila nodded, knowing that every second would count, that every choice would shape the dawn, and that the night had only just begun. And then, a sudden rustle from the shadows, a movement too deliberate to be the wind, made her heart leap. The danger was real, the stakes higher than ever, and the night had already begun to test them both in ways they could not yet understand. The story was poised on the edge of revelation, the first chapter of a night that promised courage, sacrifice, and secrets yet to be revealed. Lila tightened her grip on her dagger, her eyes meeting the Apache's, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside seemed to vanish. The desert waited, the wind whispered, and the night was far from over. The first choice had been made. The rest would come with the darkness, with the unknown, with a test that would demand everything from Lila, from the Apache, and from the fragile bond of hope that held her sister's life in balance. The stage was set, the players in place, and the night stretched endlessly ahead, full of suspense, danger, and the first whispers of a story that would not end until every truth had been revealed. The cabin door shivered again in the wind, and Lila knew the first shadow had crossed the threshold. The night had begun. Lila's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the dagger at her waist, though her stance remained firm. The cabin seemed smaller now, the shadows longer, each movement outside the window sending her pulse racing. Her sister's soft sobs from the next room reminded her why she had come. Every choice, every step, had been for that trembling figure pressed against the wall. The men outside had no mercy, no rules, only the raw hunger for power in a lawless land. And Lila was betting everything on a single gamble. The Apache's presence was steady, his broad frame leaning slightly against the rough wooden wall, eyes scanning the horizon beyond the window. There was a tension in his shoulders, a readiness that made him seem like he had lived a lifetime in this one moment. Lila studied him, trying to understand the man who was now her companion in this desperate act. He had an air of authority that didn't need words to command respect. She wondered what stories were hidden in the lines of his face, what battles he had fought, what choices he had made that left him here, watching over her as if he had already chosen to honor her courage. "I've seen people die for less," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the cabin. Lila flinched slightly, not from fear, but from the knowledge that he understood the gravity of her situation without her explaining a word. He was not judging. He was calculating, like a predator who recognized the strength in his prey, yet chose restraint. "I don't want to die," Lila admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't let her." Her words trailed off, swallowed by the fear and urgency that had driven her to this point. Her sister's life was more important than her own, more important than anything she had ever known. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of movement, the creak of wooden wheels and the low thrum of horses' hooves. Lila's mind raced. She knew the men guarding the house weren't idle. They would test her resolve, push boundaries, see if she could be broken. And if she failed, her sister would pay the price. The thought made her stomach turn, but she straightened, determined not to show weakness. The Apache tilted his head, noticing her tension. "They'll test you," he said simply. "It's what men like them do. But you've got something they don't. You've got heart, courage. That matters more than anything else." His words were steady, measured, and yet they carried a weight that made her cheeks warm. For the first time since the day her sister was taken, Lila felt a flicker of hope. She thought back to that morning, the way she had risen before the sun, her hair tied back and hands bruised from trying to gather whatever supplies might help her. Her sister had been crying quietly in the corner, the fear in her eyes sharp and raw. Lila remembered the promises she had made, the desperate pleadings, the tears that had burned her face as she swore she would do anything. And now, here she was, at the edge of fear and courage, about to walk into a night that could destroy her or define her. The Apache moved closer to the window, eyes scanning the horizon again. "They don't understand what you've done," he said, voice low, almost to himself. "They think it's a simple trade. They don't know it's a choice made with a kind of courage that can't be bought or threatened away." Lila followed his gaze, the desert stretching endlessly under the dim moonlight, shadows shifting with every breeze. She could almost feel the weight of the land, the long history of survival and struggle etched into every rock, every tree, every whispering wind. She had grown up hearing stories of brave women and men who faced impossible odds, and now she was living one of those stories herself. Her thoughts drifted to her sister, to the small, fragile figure who had no idea how close death had been, how fragile hope could be. Lila had always protected her, had always been the stronger one, but tonight, strength meant something different. It meant sacrifice, endurance, and the courage to face a night filled with shadows and uncertainty. A sudden noise at the edge of the clearing made her stiffen. A branch snapping underfoot, a faint shuffle that wasn't quite a whisper, a shadow that moved too deliberately to be the wind. Layla's hand went instinctively to the dagger, fingers tightening around the hilt. The Apache's eyes narrowed, and for the first time she saw the depth of his focus. He was reading the night, the land, the danger, and preparing for what might come. "You're not afraid," he said, voice steady but carrying an edge that hinted at challenge. Lila swallowed hard. "I am," she admitted, "but fear isn't going to save her. I have to do this." He nodded once, and in that motion she felt the weight of silent approval. It was strange, the way a stranger could offer understanding without words, could see the courage behind the fear, the determination behind the trembling. Lila realized she had not expected this quiet, unspoken support in a world filled with danger and cruelty. The hours stretched slowly. The cabin's walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer, darker. Every sound outside, the scrape of wood, the shifting of earth, the distant calls of animals, made Lila's pulse quicken. She moved only when necessary, staying close to the Apache, learning from the way he read the night, the way he listened for threats that her inexperienced ears could barely detect. "You've got to trust yourself," he said after a long silence. "Trust that your courage is enough. That's the only thing that can carry you through this night." Lila nodded, trying to absorb the weight of his advice. Trusting herself was harder than she expected. Every second was a test, every shadow a potential enemy, every whisper of wind a threat. And yet, in the quiet moments between fear and action, she could feel the resolve growing. She could feel the strength she had carried all along, the bond with her sister, the fire that refused to die. A sudden noise made both of them tense. Footsteps, deliberate, careful, coming closer. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and leather, the faint tang of something metallic. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. She tightened her grip on the dagger, her body coiled for action. The Apache moved smoothly, silently, positioning himself between her and the door, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. "They're coming," he said quietly. Lila swallowed, her throat dry, mind racing through every possibility. She had prepared for this moment in her own way, with plans, contingencies, and courage, but nothing could truly ready her for the unknown that was pressing against the cabin walls. The door rattled slightly, a whisper of warning. Layla's sister whimpered in the next room, fear evident in her small voice. Layla's chest tightened, guilt and determination mingling. She had promised her sister freedom, and she would see it through. No matter the cost, no matter the danger. The Apache glanced at her, eyes sharp, calculating. "Remember," he said, "one night. Stay true to your word, and your sister walks free. Everything else is just survival." Layla nodded again, steeling herself. She had faced fear before, but never like this, never with so much at stake. The world outside the cabin seemed to close in, the wind carrying secrets and danger, the night alive with threats unseen. She could feel it pressing on her, urging her to doubt, to falter. And yet, she could also feel something else, a strange reassurance, the silent presence of someone who understood the courage it took to make a choice like hers. Another movement outside, more deliberate this time, brought her full attention back to the present. The shadow pressed against the cabin walls, a reminder that the night was far from over. That danger was constant, and that every choice she made would echo far beyond these walls. Layla's grip on her dagger tightened once more. She was ready, not because she was fearless, but because she had no choice but to be. Her mind raced back to the deal she had struck. One night, only one night. The promise that everything else would be forgiven, that her sister would walk free. It was simple, yet heavy with consequences. And now, as the shadows pressed against the cabin and the wind whispered warnings, she understood the depth of what she had agreed to. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement mattered. The Apache's eyes never left the door. Lila watched him, trying to absorb his calm, his readiness, his understanding of the night and its dangers. He was a man shaped by experience, by rules, by honor, and somehow, in that quiet, tense space, he had become an ally, a protector, someone who might guide her through what was to come. A sudden crack of a branch outside made them both tense. Layla's mind raced, imagining every possible scenario, every danger that could come through the door. She had to remain alert, silent, focused. Her sister's life depended on it. Every instinct screamed at her to prepare, to anticipate, to act. The wind whispered again, carrying the scent of dust, smoke, and something darker, something that made her stomach twist. The night was alive, and it was testing her, pressing against her courage, her resolve, and her determination to keep her promise. The Apache's voice broke the tension, low and steady. "Stay sharp. The night isn't done with us yet." Lila nodded, gripping her dagger, feeling the weight of every choice, every action, every moment. The story was unfolding around them, dangerous and unpredictable, and she was at the center of it. The shadows pressed closer, the wind carried secrets, and the night stretched ahead with endless possibilities and threats unseen. Every sound, every movement, every shadow could mean life or death. Lila's heart raced as the first true test of the night drew near. Her sister's freedom, her own survival, and the fragile trust between her and the Apache balanced on a knife edge. The wind moaned through the cracks, carrying the weight of the desert, the danger, and the choices yet to come. And then, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, made her freeze. A whisper against the cabin walls, deliberate and precise. Lila's pulse quickened. The night was far from over, and the first challenge of what they were facing had arrived. Every sense in her body screamed for attention, for action, for awareness. The shadows outside shifted again, carrying the promise of danger, the tension of unspoken threats, and the weight of choices yet to be made. Lila tightened her grip on the dagger, heart hammering, mind racing, ready for whatever the night would throw at her. The desert wind whispered, carrying secrets, danger, and the first flickers of a story that would not be resolved until every shadow had been faced. The cabin held its breath, the night stretched endlessly, and the story waited, poised on the edge of revelation and danger. Lila's sister was counting on her. The Apache watched silently, and the first shadow pressed closer, reminding them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to face it. The wind outside carried a chill now, sweeping across the desert and rattling the cabin's loose shutters. Lila pressed herself closer to the wall, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of movement. Her sister's soft breathing came from the next room, a fragile reminder of why she was here. The Apache remained a silent presence beside her, eyes fixed on the shadows that pressed against the walls, every muscle ready for the smallest sign of danger. Lila felt the weight of the night settle on her shoulders, heavy but necessary. There was no turning back. She thought about the men outside, their crude laughter, the arrogance in their movements, the way they underestimated anyone who did not fit their image of fear. She had seen it before in the small towns she had passed through, in the settlers who had whispered warnings to her, in the rough hands that had tried to intimidate her. They believed courage could be bought or broken, and yet here she was, standing in defiance of all their assumptions. She would prove that courage and love were stronger than fear and greed. A soft knock at the door made her jump, the dagger in her hand a lifeline. The Apache's hand went to his belt, fingers brushing the edge of his own knife, but he did not move to strike. "Wait," he whispered, and Lila froze. Another knock, this time heavier, deliberate. The tension was unbearable. Lila's sister whimpered, and Lila whispered back, "Stay calm, I'm here. I won't let anything happen." The door cracked open just a fraction, enough to reveal a shadowed face, eyes wary, scanning the cabin. One of the men who had taken her sister stepped inside, a smirk on his face that did not reach his eyes. Lila's heart pounded. She could see the outline of a gun in his hand. Her mind raced, trying to calculate every possible outcome, every chance to protect her sister. "I thought you might try to run," he said, voice low, taunting. Funny girl, making deals she can't keep. Lila's grip on the dagger tightened. The Apache moved slightly, a silent warning, and the man paused, sensing a presence he had not expected. There was a stillness, a pause in the night that seemed to stretch forever. Lila took a careful step forward. "I didn't make a deal to run. I made a deal to save my sister. That's the only thing that matters." Her voice was calm, though every word carried the weight of desperation and determination. The man's smirk faltered slightly. He had not expected defiance, especially from someone so young. "You think courage matters here?" he asked, stepping further into the cabin. "This isn't a storybook. Choices have consequences." "Yes," Lila said quietly, meeting his gaze. "And I've chosen. I'll face the consequences, but I won't let her pay for them." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. The Apache's eyes never left the man, measuring, calculating, ready to act at the first sign of real threat. The man laughed, a short, harsh sound that bounced off the walls. "You've got spirit," he said. "I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't save lives." He stepped closer, and the weight of the gun made the room feel smaller, tighter. Lila's mind raced, thinking of ways to turn the situation in her favor without giving them reason to harm her sister. At that moment, a second figure appeared in the doorway, unseen until now. A young boy, barely more than a child, with dirt-smudged cheeks and wide eyes, carried a tray of food. He froze when he saw the tension in the room. Lila's pulse quickened. Was he a friend or a spy? She could not know, and in this world, uncertainty was as dangerous as any weapon. The Apache shifted subtly, signaling Lila to stay still. The man with the gun glanced at the boy, then back at Lila, irritation flickering across his face. "Leave," he barked. The boy hesitated, then scurried back, tray rattling, the sound echoing in the tense silence. The moment passed, but Lila could feel her heart still racing. The night was testing her, pushing her to remain calm under pressure, and every second of hesitation could cost her sister dearly. She thought back to her childhood, to the lessons her mother had imparted. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Every hardship she had faced before this, the long walks across the plains, the small skirmishes with bandits, the whispered threats of townsfolk had been preparation for this night. She realized with a strange clarity that survival required more than courage alone. It required calculation, patience, and the willingness to embrace danger without flinching. The Apache's eyes shifted toward the window. Another shadow moved outside, closer this time, deliberate and slow. Lila's pulse quickened. Every sense in her body screamed that the night held more than just the men inside the cabin. Something else lingered in the desert, watching, waiting, testing them. She could feel it pressing in from the darkness, a presence she could not name. "I've seen this before," the Apache murmured, almost to himself. "The ones who think fear can be hidden, they always get caught." Lila's gaze met his, searching for guidance, reassurance, any hint of how to survive the night. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Stay alert, trust your instincts. They'll carry you through when nothing else can." The words were simple, but they held weight. Lila focused, letting the fear settle into something sharper, more controlled. She listened to the wind, to the subtle sounds of movement outside, to the creak of the floorboards under the men's boots. Each detail mattered. Each moment could be the difference between life and death. Hours passed slowly, the night stretching, unbroken, yet heavy with anticipation. The men inside the cabin grew restless, their whispers and shifting movements carrying through the thin walls. Lila could feel their suspicion, their doubts, their need to assert control. But she did not flinch. She stood steady, a quiet force in the room, determined to endure. Her mind wandered to her sister again. The girl's small hands, trembling against the wall, had been the spark that fueled Lila's courage. Every choice, every movement, every risk she took was to ensure that her sister would walk free. The thought gave her strength, a clarity that cut through the fear. She was not alone in this. She had purpose, and purpose was a weapon stronger than any blade. Suddenly, a loud noise shattered the tense calm. A horse's hooves slammed against the ground outside, sending vibrations through the cabin floor. The men inside cursed, voices raised in alarm. Layla's heart raced. She could feel the night shift, sense the danger that was pressing closer. The Apache moved with smooth precision, positioning himself between her and the door. The moment had arrived, the true test of the deal she had made and of the courage she had carried this far. The shadow at the window moved faster now, and Lila caught a glimpse of a figure slipping through the darkness. Her instincts screamed for action, but she held still, trusting the Apache's guidance. The night was alive, and it demanded patience as much as bravery. Every second counted, and one wrong move could unravel everything. Lila thought back to the first time she had encountered danger in this territory. She had been just 12, hiding from bandits in the small canyon near her home. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the way her heart had pounded in her chest. And yet, she had survived. The memory gave her strength now. She could face the night because she had faced fear before. She could endure because she had endured. The Apache's voice broke through her thoughts. "They're testing us. Don't react until it's necessary." His eyes never left the shadows. Lila nodded, letting the tension settle into readiness, letting every nerve sharpen, every sense heighten. The night had become a living thing, a presence that pressed against them, demanding focus, courage, and clarity. Another sound, faint but deliberate, came from the corner of the cabin. Lila's dagger moved instinctively in her hand. She tensed, every muscle ready for action. The Apache shifted, a silent warning to wait, to observe. The men inside were beginning to sense the unease, the tension between them, and the balance was delicate. One mistake could trigger violence, could end the fragile promise that hung between Lila and her sister's freedom. The night dragged on, each moment stretching, thick with anticipation. Lila could feel the desert pressing in, the wind carrying secrets and danger. The men inside were restless. The shadows outside moved with intention, and every sound became amplified, every movement a potential threat. She understood now that survival required more than courage. It required patience, calculation, and a willingness to endure the unknown. Her thoughts drifted to the Apache again. He was an enigma, a man of few words but immense presence. She wondered about his past, about the battles he had fought, the choices he had made, the lives he had saved and lost. And yet, here he was, silently guiding her, protecting her, acknowledging the courage that had brought her to this point. A faint light appeared outside, flickering across the cabin wall. Lila's breath caught. She could see movement, deliberate, careful, almost ritualistic. The night was far from over. The shadows were testing her, pressing against the walls, probing for weakness. She tightened her grip on the dagger, ready to face whatever came next. Her sister's soft sobs reminded her again why she was here. Every action, every moment of courage, every choice was for that trembling figure in the next room. Lila steeled herself, focusing on the one truth that mattered. She would endure. She would survive. And she would protect her sister no matter the cost. The Apache spoke quietly, his voice steady but carrying weight. They'll push. They'll test everything: fear, loyalty, courage. But you're ready. You've got more strength than you know. Lila nodded, letting the words anchor her, sharpen her focus. The night was not done with them. It was only beginning to reveal its tests. A sudden sound outside, a low, deliberate whistle, made her freeze. The shadows shifted. Lila's pulse quickened. The night was alive, and it was pressing against them with a force she could feel in her chest. Every choice, every movement, every heartbeat mattered. The story was far from over. And then, the faint scrape of a boot against the cabin's floor, deliberate and slow, reminded her that the night held secrets yet unseen. Lila's grip tightened on her dagger, her eyes scanning the shadows. The Apache's hand moved slightly, a silent signal that the real challenge was approaching. The night stretched endlessly, full of anticipation, danger, and secrets yet to be revealed. Lila understood that survival was only part of the test. The other part was courage, the kind that demanded sacrifice, endurance, and the willingness to face the unknown. Outside, the desert whispered. Inside, the cabin held its breath. Lila's sister's life hung in the balance. The Apache's eyes were sharp and steady, and the first real challenge of the night had begun to take shape. The story was poised on the edge of revelation, tension tight as a bowstring, ready to snap with the next move. Every shadow, every whisper, every heartbeat mattered. Lila's courage, her choices, and the silent presence of the Apache would be tested in ways they could not yet foresee. The wind outside howled through the gaps in the cabin walls, carrying the scent of dust and the sharp tang of danger. Every sound seemed magnified, the scrape of boots across the floorboards, the faint shift of the shadows beyond the windows, the soft, uncertain breathing of her sister in the next room. Layla's hand tightened around the dagger at her waist, knuckles white, but her stance remained steady. She could feel the tension pressing into her chest, a living weight that demanded focus, courage, and every ounce of her resolve. The Apache's eyes never left the shadows. He was alert, precise, a predator in his own right, but he did not move rashly. Lila studied him, trying to understand how he could maintain such calm when danger pressed from every angle. She realized that he had learned to trust instinct and patience, to let fear sharpen him rather than consume him. She tried to emulate him, letting the fear settle into a cold clarity that focused her senses, making her hyper-aware of every sound, every movement, every breath. A faint creak came from the cabin door. Lila froze, dagger poised. The Apache's hand went to his belt but stayed there, his eyes narrowing as the door inched open. The dim light of the moon outside spilled through the crack, casting long shadows across the floor. A man's silhouette moved into view, tense, cautious. Lila could see the glint of a knife in his hand, the nervous weight in his step. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, trying to assert control. Layla's heart raced, but she held her ground. "I have to be," she said, voice calm, though every word vibrated with tension. "She's my sister." "You know why I'm here." The man hesitated, uncertain. Lila's gaze flicked to the Apache, who remained silent but alert, a constant reminder that she was not alone. The balance in the room shifted, a silent battle of will and patience, of fear and resolve. Every second stretched, carrying weight beyond measure. Suddenly the shadow at the window moved, deliberate, almost predatory. Lila's pulse spiked, another intruder. Her mind raced, calculating the possibilities, the dangers. She couldn't know their numbers, their intentions, or their patience. All she could do was trust her instincts, trust the Apache, and hold her nerve. The Apache moved with fluid precision, positioning himself slightly in front of her, a silent shield. Lila realized she could count on him not to waver, not to falter. His presence steadied her, made the tension almost manageable, even in the chaos pressing in from all sides. She focused, each sense alert, each muscle ready to act. The night had become a living thing, pushing, testing, and demanding every ounce of courage she could summon. Her sister's soft sobs reached her again, and Lila whispered reassurance, though her own throat felt dry. "Stay strong," she said. "I'm here. I won't let them harm you." The words were simple, but the weight behind them carried truth. Lila had chosen to face this night for someone else, and that choice had transformed her fear into resolve. Outside, a branch snapped underfoot. Lila's eyes darted to the window, catching movement in the shadows. Another figure emerged, low to the ground, cautious but deliberate. Her pulse quickened. She knew now that the night's tests were far from over. Every shadow held danger. Every whisper could signal attack. Every step outside could change everything. The man who had entered the cabin earlier stepped closer, voice harsh. "You think your courage matters here? Choices have consequences, girl." "Yes," Layla said, steady, meeting his gaze. "And I've chosen. I'll face them. But my sister will not." The words were firm, unwavering, carrying the weight of her promise. The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension almost tangible, a wire stretched so tight it could snap at any moment. The shadows outside shifted again. A figure darted between the moonlight and darkness, silent, deliberate. Layla's instincts screamed for her to act, but she remained still, trusting the Apache's judgment. The tension in the room was palpable, each heartbeat a drumbeat in the slow rhythm of the night. Hours seemed to pass like moments. Every small noise, every flicker of shadow, every movement of the wind became a signal, a warning, a test. Layla's nerves were taut, every sense stretched to its limit. The men in the cabin grew restless, their whispers sharper, their glances more calculating. They were beginning to understand that she was not a girl to be intimidated easily. Courage could not be bought, and determination could not be broken. A sudden commotion outside made Lila's heart jump. Horses' hooves pounded against the dirt, dust rising in sharp waves. The Apache's eyes flicked to the window, scanning, calculating. "Stay close," he murmured. "They've brought more than curiosity this time." Lila nodded, gripping her dagger tighter. Her mind raced through every possible scenario. The night was closing in, danger pressing from all sides, shadows converging, and her sister's life balanced on the edge of uncertainty. Every instinct told her to act, but patience was as necessary as courage. She had learned that now. The door rattled violently. Lila's pulse leapt. The men inside shouted, the tension breaking into sudden chaos. The Apache moved first, a silent, fluid motion that positioned him between her and the doorway. Lila followed, stepping carefully, keeping her movements precise. Fear was present, sharp and raw, but it did not control her. She controlled it. Outside, the night pressed closer, the shadows converging on the cabin. Lila's eyes flicked to the horizon, imagining the dangers that lurked just beyond the reach of the moonlight. The desert had never felt so alive, so aware, so ready to challenge every step she took. Her sister whimpered again, and Lila's heart constricted. The small room behind her seemed distant, but the weight of responsibility pressed down, heavier than the desert wind, sharper than the knives that glinted in the faint moonlight. She had promised freedom, and that promise could not fail. A sudden whistle cut through the night, deliberate, precise, and carrying with it the promise of imminent danger. Lila's blood ran cold, and the Apache's eyes narrowed. "They're coming," he said quietly. "Get ready." Lila's fingers tightened around the dagger. She could feel the tension in the room, in the air, in every sound and shadow. The night had become a living test, pressing them to their limits. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat mattered. The Apache's presence grounded her, reminding her that she was not alone. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. The first shadow pressed against the cabin wall, moving deliberately, testing the boundaries. Layla's muscles coiled, ready to react. The Apache's hand brushed her shoulder briefly, a silent reassurance, and she drew a breath, steadying herself. The test had begun, and there was no room for hesitation. The intruders outside shifted. Their voices carried faintly through the walls, rough, impatient, hungry for control. Lila could sense their tension, their arrogance, their underestimation of her. She allowed herself a flicker of confidence, knowing that determination could be as powerful as any weapon. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the corner of the cabin. The men inside shouted, startled. Lila's pulse raced. The night had grown more dangerous, more unpredictable. Every sense in her body screamed alert. She pressed herself closer to the Apache, eyes scanning the shifting shadows for movement, for threat. The desert wind howled, carrying with it the tang of dust, smoke, and distant fire. Layla's mind raced, imagining what might be approaching, what dangers the night still held. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her, the burden of promise, the delicate balance between courage and survival. Her sister's soft sobs echoed again, a fragile thread linking Lila to the reason she had endured this far. The promise of freedom was near, but the night was far from over. Every shadow held potential danger. Every step could shift the balance. The desert, the cabin, the night, they were all alive with threat and anticipation. A sudden movement in the corner made Lila leap, dagger raised. The Apache moved as well, a silent, fluid motion that positioned him to protect her. The shadows flickered, a figure stepping closer, deliberate and controlled. Lila's heart pounded. The final moments before the night's true test had arrived. The door rattled again, harder this time. The men inside shouted, voices thick with tension and impatience. Layla's breath came faster, each exhale a deliberate effort to steady herself. She glanced briefly at the window, the desert beyond, the shadows pressing in with purpose. The night had grown alive, a force she could not ignore, a presence that demanded courage, focus, and resolve. The Apache's voice broke the silence. "Hold steady," he murmured. "This is it." Layla's pulse raced, adrenaline and fear mingling, sharpening her senses, heightening every detail. She could feel the moment stretching, the tension building, the climax of the night approaching. Her sister whimpered again. Lila pressed her free hand against the wall, grounding herself, drawing strength from the promise she had made. The danger was close, imminent, pressing at the edges of the cabin. Every shadow, every sound, every heartbeat counted. The first figure outside lunged, a shadow moving with purpose. Lila reacted, muscles coiled, dagger poised, every sense alert. The night had reached its peak, the moment before the storm. The instant where courage, resolve, and love would collide with danger. The Apache moved as well, silently, a protective force beside her. The shadows pressed closer. The wind howled. The desert held its breath. Lila's heart pounded. The night was alive, the test complete, and the story hung on the edge of revelation. Every choice, every act, every breath would shape what came next. The danger was at its height. The first strike was imminent. The climax was near. The night waited. The desert waited. The cabin waited. And Lila, dagger in hand, eyes sharp, heart steady, faced it all. The first figure lunged, but Lila and the Apache were ready. The air seemed to thrum with tension as dagger met knife, a clash of steel that rang sharply in the small cabin. Lila moved with a precision she hadn't known she possessed, every instinct honed by fear and determination. The Apache's presence was a steady anchor, his movements deliberate and unflinching, guarding her flank, shielding her sister, and creating a rhythm of action that carried them through the chaos. The men in the cabin shouted and cursed, but the tide had turned. Lila's courage, sharpened by desperation, was matched by the Apache's skill and calm. Together, they moved like a single force, every strike calculated, every defensive motion precise. The initial wave of threats was met and held back, the intruders faltering against the determination and resolve in front of them. Lila could see it in their eyes, the first real fear, the realization that this was not an easy target. A loud crash came from the window as one of the shadowed figures outside attempted to force entry. The Apache moved immediately, intercepting, his strong hand shoving the intruder back into the darkness. Lila's dagger struck in rhythm with his motion, her fear now transformed into controlled action. She realized that courage wasn't about being unafraid, it was about facing the danger anyway, about holding fast when the world seemed determined to break you. Her sister's whimpers had become steadier, no longer of fear, but of relief as she realized that her protector was fierce, determined, and capable. Lila could feel the bond between them, reinforced by every trial, every risk, every heartbeat that had carried them through the long, dangerous night. The Apache's presence reminded her that allies could appear in the most unexpected ways, that courage alone was strengthened when shared. The remaining men hesitated, glancing at each other as the confidence of the defenders grew. Lila's movements became more assured, her strikes precise, her focus unyielding. She had faced fear and uncertainty, and the night had honed her into someone capable of acting decisively under pressure. Every second mattered, and she had learned to trust her instincts, to move with intention, and to hold the line for something greater than herself. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of retreating footsteps. The threat was receding, the danger easing. Lila allowed herself a moment to breathe, though her attention never wavered. The night was not yet over, but the tide had shifted. Survival was within reach, and the promise she had made to her sister was still alive. The Apache moved toward the door, opening it cautiously. The desert beyond was quiet, the shadows retreating into the distance. Lila followed, stepping out into the cool night air, heart still racing but filled with a sense of relief. She looked at the Apache, noticing the faintest hint of a smile, a quiet acknowledgment of the courage she had shown. Her sister rushed into her arms, and Lila held her tightly, feeling the fragile weight of relief and safety. "I promised," she whispered. "I told you I would protect you." The girl's tears were hot against her cheek, but there was laughter in them, a release of the fear that had gripped her for so long. The bond between them had never been stronger, forged in the fire of courage, sacrifice, and love. The Apache stood back, his eyes scanning the horizon, ensuring that the danger was truly gone. He nodded to Lila, a silent sign that the threat had passed, that the night's trials had been overcome. There was a quiet strength in him that made her realize courage was not only about facing danger, it was about knowing when to act, when to protect, and when to trust that the darkness would not consume all. As dawn began to touch the edges of the desert sky, painting the horizon in shades of gold and amber, Lila felt the weight of the night lift. Every fear, every tension, every moment of uncertainty had passed, leaving behind the hard-earned knowledge that she could endure, that she could protect, and that courage was more powerful than any threat. She turned to her sister, seeing the relief and joy mirrored in her eyes. The girl's small hands clung to her tightly, a reminder of why she had endured the danger, why she had faced the night with such determination. Lila understood now that love and courage were inseparable, that one gave meaning and strength to the other. The Apache approached them, his presence calm and steady. "The night is done," he said quietly. "The danger is gone." Lila nodded, realizing that the trials they had faced were more than physical, they had been tests of courage, resolve, and the strength of bonds that could not be broken. The men who had threatened them were either gone or scattered, their arrogance replaced by the understanding that courage and determination could not be intimidated. Lila's body ached from the tension, from the constant alertness, but her spirit felt light, freed from the fear that had gripped her for so long. She thought about the lessons of the night, the patience, the calculated courage, the understanding that survival required more than just instinct. It required focus, trust, and a willingness to act decisively in the face of fear. She realized that she had not only protected her sister, but had also grown into a person who could face any challenge with strength and resolve. Her sister smiled up at her. The tears dried, replaced by the first signs of hope and confidence. "You saved me," she said softly, awe and gratitude mingling in her voice. Lila hugged her tightly. "We saved each other," she said, the truth of the words resonating deeply. Every choice she had made had been for her sister, but the courage they shared had created an unbreakable bond between them. The Apache stood back, observing the moment, understanding that the night's events had forged something lasting. "Courage," he said quietly, almost to himself, "is not just surviving the danger. It's knowing why you fight and who you fight for." Lila nodded, recognizing the depth of his words, understanding that they carried meaning far beyond the desert cabin, beyond the dangers of the night. The morning sun rose higher, casting light over the desert and warming the rough terrain. Lila felt the tension ease completely, replaced by a sense of relief, accomplishment, and quiet joy. The danger had been overcome. The promise had been kept. Her sister was safe, and the night's lessons had strengthened her in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. They packed what they could carry and left the cabin, stepping carefully into the soft morning light. Lila felt the weight of responsibility shift slightly, lighter now, tempered by the knowledge that courage and determination could see them through even the darkest of nights. Every step forward was a step into freedom, hope, and a new beginning. Her sister's hand remained in hers, small and trusting, and Lila knew that the bond forged in fear and courage would carry them forward, unshakable and strong. The Apache walked beside them, a steady presence, his knowledge and skill a quiet protection for the journey ahead. As they moved through the desert, Lila reflected on the night's events, the choices she had made, the courage she had summoned, the threats they had faced, and the love that had driven every action. She understood now that true courage was not about fearlessness, but about the determination to act despite fear, to protect those you love, and to hold fast when the world presses in. The sun climbed higher, warming the sand, illuminating the path before them. The horizon stretched endlessly, but the fear and tension of the night had passed, replaced by a quiet determination and hope. Lila's sister laughed softly, the sound carrying across the open land, a reminder of why every risk had been worth it. The Apache nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement of the victory and the journey they had shared. Lila understood that he would move on, as all travelers did, but his presence had left an imprint, a lesson in courage, patience, and the power of quiet strength. Together, the sisters moved forward, the night behind them, the danger vanquished, and the lessons of courage and determination carried into the day. Lila's heart was steady, filled with gratitude, relief, and the knowledge that she had faced fear and emerged stronger. The desert stretched wide and open, but Lila no longer felt its threats pressing against her. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every heartbeat of the night had been endured. The fear was gone. The danger had passed. And in its place was the quiet, unshakable strength of love, courage, and the promise kept. She turned to her sister one last time, seeing the trust and hope shining in her eyes. "We're free," she said, softly. And in that moment, the weight of the night lifted completely, replaced by the warmth of safety, family, and a future that was now theirs to shape. The Apache watched for a moment, then stepped back into the desert shadows, a silent guardian who had taught lessons without words, who had guided without demand, who had ensured that courage and determination triumphed over fear. Lila felt a quiet gratitude, knowing that his presence had changed the course of the night and of their lives. As the sun fully illuminated the landscape, Lila and her sister walked hand in hand, leaving behind the cabin, the danger, and the shadows of the night. Every step carried freedom, relief, and the promise of a new beginning. The desert was vast, but so was the strength they now carried within them. The journey ahead was theirs, but the night had proven that courage, love, and determination could overcome even the darkest trials. Lila understood that she had not only saved her sister, but had discovered the depth of her own strength, the power of choice, and the value of protecting those you love. With each step into the warm morning, the sisters embraced the freedom they had fought for, the lessons of courage etched into their hearts, and the knowledge that the night's trials had forged something unbreakable between them. The wind carried them forward, the sun warmed their faces, and the promise of tomorrow stretched before them, bright, hopeful, and filled with the certainty that love and courage could overcome even the darkest shadows. Lila's hand tightened once more around her sister's. "We did it," she said quietly, a smile touching her lips. Her sister laughed softly in reply, and for the first time in many long hours, the weight of fear was completely gone. The Apache disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind a quiet strength and a reminder that courage and loyalty could appear in unexpected forms. Lila and her sister continued walking, free at last, hearts steady, spirits light, and the future open before them. The story of the night ended not with defeat or despair, but with triumph, hope, and the knowledge that true courage lies in the choice to face fear, protect love, and endure until the darkness fades. And in that sunlit desert, with the wind at their backs and freedom ahead, Lila knew they had truly survived, stronger, closer, and ready to embrace the life that awaited them. The night was over, the danger past, and for the first time in a long time, Lila felt the quiet peace of victory, hard-earned, complete, and shared with the one she loved most. The desert was silent now, the shadows retreating, the wind carrying the echoes of courage, love, and determination. And as the sisters walked forward, hand in hand, the world seemed full of possibility, hope, and the promise of a new beginning.